Hello everyone, I'm Golden Sound, you're watching the Headphone Show by Headphones.com, and today we're taking a look at the Moondrop KATO in-ear monitors. Now, for a little bit of context, I was actually sent these by mistake. These were sent in for review by Shenzhen Audio, thank you very much Shenzhen, but I was supposed to be being sent something else and these arrived instead. And they said, well, since they're there, do you want to review them anyway? And I said, yes, because I've really enjoyed all of the Moondrop stuff I've tried before. I actually own the original Blessings, I like the Blessing 2 even more, and the Blessing 2 Dusk were the first products I ever reviewed, so I was pretty excited to give these a go. Upon opening the box, my first thoughts were, well, the packaging's very nice. The cable that these come with is way nicer than what comes with most IEMs, both in aesthetics and in feel and construction, and the IEMs themselves are built beautifully, with an elegant matte finish and low poly shape that both looked quite unique and pleasing, and provided excellent comfort. The combination of all this, plus the fact that my initial impressions on sound were basically 100% positive, I just assumed these have got to be $600 or so, maybe a little bit more. And when I looked up the price, I had an experience similar to what DMS had with the Aria. You can watch his review here. I was quite pleasantly surprised. At less than $200, these are very difficult to find a reason not to purchase. So let's talk about why. For evaluation, I mostly use Zelastec tips. The stock tips I was a little bit mixed on comfort with, and I also found them to be too flexible, leading to them unfolding when taking the IEMs out quite frequently, which was a bit frustrating. The overall sound of the KATO can be described as a slightly relaxed alteration to Harman neutral, or possibly slightly downward sloped. It's a single dynamic driver setup with a moderate rise into the sub-bass that gives a dynamic and punchy presentation, helped by the fact that it's a dynamic driver, but not so much as to overwhelm you or make them unsuitable for background listening. Playing tracks like Why Can't You Wait by Bob Moses and the Chainsmokers hits you with fast, forceful, and nuanced low ends, well controlled, that doesn't overextend or bleed over into the mids and vocal region too much, like some bassier IEMs can. So it leaves the vocals clear and uncongested, but with a slightly warm or lush feel to them. In fact, vocals are a particularly enjoyable aspect of these IEMs. The treble generally is slightly dark, but the upper treble is slightly pushed up, at least in comparison to Harman neutral. The right amount there depends on whose target curve you're looking at. This gives vocals and some other elements an overall intimate presentation, not really staging them that massively, just keeping them in close, but keeping the transients and air prominent enough that despite the slight intimacy and warmth, there's a surprising level of detail and clarity to everything. Often if a headphone is too dark overall, then I find that can lead to less perceived detail, and if something is too warm or too bassy, then that can overpower things like vocals and percussion. The KATO is balancing this very nicely. They're slightly dark, but the upper treble lift keeps them sounding fast and clear. There's going to be a number of people who would want these to be just a touch brighter, and if I was sat just doing critical listening, I'd potentially be inclined to agree, but what the tuning of these does is keep it mostly neutral, but just edge it towards a slightly more relaxed sound signature. And as a result, even when I've had various very high performance headphones on my desk, when I'm working and wanting to listen to music at the same time, I found myself reaching for these every single time. Now obviously, I like headphones that do anything as well as they possibly can, but I do find that headphones which are particularly dynamic and punchy, have particularly impressive soundstage, are brighter tuned, or even just particularly resolving, whilst exactly what I'd want for critical listening, are a bit distracting when I'm trying to get work done. I just like that these struck a balance of being genuinely high performance with great technical chops, but slightly less intense than something which was a bit more V-shaped, for example. There's also no clear peaks, dips, or shoutiness anywhere in the treble, which helps a lot of vocals and instruments to keep a very natural and realistic sounding timbre, as well as meaning that the KATOs have been completely fatigue-free for me, and I've been listening to them for hours on end without issue. Other areas of technical performance such as imaging and separation are also very good, and I'd quite confidently say that these are performing pretty far above their price point. These are just so pleasant to listen to, and there's so little that I can complain about in terms of the sound here or price to performance. Moondrop has done a stellar job. Sub-bass extension is excellent without being overwhelming or exaggerated. Lower mid-range has a slight lift that gives these a pleasant lushness to the sound, but again done tastefully so as not to overdo it and become bloated or muddy. Upper mids and vocals are basically Harman tuned, but leading into a slightly darkened but very well balanced treble, free of any problematic peaks or dips, giving vocals an intimate but clear and resolving presentation. And to top it all off, a slight lift into the upper treble that gives these some air, keeps things sounding fast, and generally helps to make these a very technically capable take on a slightly relaxed presentation. It's also worth noting that these come with 2 sets of nozzles, one steel and one brass. I personally didn't find that the brass nozzles made a massive difference. It's noticeable, and they do cut down on the upper treble somewhat, but I preferred the snappier sound of the steel nozzles anyway, and also some users are reporting that if they wear them in the gym, for example, when they're sweating, that the brass nozzles are actually corroding. So I would recommend just sticking with the steel ones. So let's take a look at the Kato in regards to objective sound. Here we can see the Kato's frequency response compared to Harman's in-ear target curve. Overall, a slightly tamed response compared to Harman, less of a V-shape, which explains the slightly laid-back nature of the Kato, but as mentioned in the subjective segment, having a little extra upper treble just to keep things sounding snappy and airy. Starting off in the bass region, we can see that the Kato has slightly less of a sub-bass emphasis than Harman, sloping down gently into the mid-bass region where it's slightly above the target curve. This contributes to a more warm, lush sound signature whilst still providing enough sub-bass and extension to keep things punchy and dynamic. There's also pretty much no early roll-off towards the sub-bass. Moving along further into the mid-range, it adheres quite closely to the Harman neutral target, with just a very slight dip around the 600 to 700 Hz area, which, depending on who you ask, might be a good thing. Some people find that a slight dip in this region actually contributes to a larger perceived soundstage. The treble itself is free of any major peaks and dips, keeping a fairly uniform Harman shape, but staying overall a few decibels below the Harman target. So the Kato are indeed a little bit darker than neutral, which may not be to everyone's tastes, but the uniformity does mean that these will be very easy to change with EQ if you'd prefer. Especially if you have a product with this feature built in, like the Chord Mojo 2. You can watch my review of this by clicking the banner up top, or the link in the description. And lastly, above 10 kHz, we can see the Kato move to being on average a few decibels above Harman neutral. This gives them a bit of a transient emphasis and spaciousness. There will no doubt be countless models which people might be considering in addition to these, but the one that I've seen most people bring up when talking about the Kato is the 7Hz Timeless. If you want to see a full review of these, Precog has one you can watch by clicking the banner or the link in the description, but here's a few comparison thoughts. There's one area in which the Timeless definitely beats the Kato, which is resolution. The Timeless noticeably exceeds the Kato in pure detail, with a sharper treble, but at the cost of, and perhaps in part because of, quite an uneven and peaky treble response. This does make things sound more apparently detailed, but for me, way more artificial and also much more prone to sibilance and fatigue. The treble just isn't very well balanced at all, and some tracks were honestly a struggle to get through on these. The Kato might lose out to the Timeless in pure resolution, but it definitely wins on tonality and tuning. Additionally, I found the Kato to provide a more precise stereo image. Direction was clearer with the Kato than it was on the Timeless, and macrodynamics on the Timeless, whilst at first seeming to be okay, the longer you listen, the more you become aware of and bothered by the pillowy nature of things. No matter what tips I tried, no matter what I was doing in terms of insertion depth, they're just softer, especially when you're comparing directly to the Katos. A being between the two, things like kick drums just didn't sound anywhere near as realistic on the Timeless as they did on the Kato, nor anywhere near as engaging. The Kato just presented significantly tighter and better controlled low end. So for me, the Kato definitely wins over the Timeless. The Timeless wins on detail, but it falls behind in way too many other areas to make up for it. To wrap up, the Kato is a product that I think performs very well at and above its price point. It's something that I've become more and more fond of the more time I've spent with it, and if you're wanting something which is going to extract every last ounce of detail and provide the most technically proficient presentation possible, there's going to be other IMs which are better for you. But what these excel at is in providing a technically proficient enough presentation with some tasteful deviations from neutral, and honestly no major faults at all, that make them a phenomenal all-rounder. These are some very enjoyable IEMs and ones that I found myself using frequently, even with plenty of other stuff on the desk. I hope you found this review helpful and enjoyable. If you did, leave a like or a comment of what you might like to see reviewed in the future. And if you'd like to come and talk to me and other audiophiles about music, gear, or anything else at all, come and say hi on our Discord server or the headphones.com forum. Subscribe for more videos like this. Until next time.